Alright, you know the drill. This month I've got 3 games, so let's just get right into it. There are a number of legitimate complaints you can make about Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney's Spirit of Justice. The fact that Phoenix, Apollo, and Athena, despite their cases worth of experience, are all written like this is their first time in a courtroom, so that cases feel less like unraveling a mystery and more like presenting some absurd hypothetical and then working backwards to prove that it was the case. The fact that the writers forgot to give Nayuta any redeemable character traits until the last hour of gameplay. The general absurdity of the DC act and premise alone. These are all rather major detractors, and in a weaker game they might be deal breakers, but here they are at best mild irritants and distractors from the things that Spirit of Justice does well. Trials and Tribulations may still lay claim to the title of best overarching narrative in an Ace Attorney game, but Spirit of Justice undoubtedly has the best set of individual cases in the mainline Ace Attorney series. Cases 2 through 5 all have wonderfully layered plots that emphasize the series' mystery element in a way that no prior game does, and all choose at least one character from the game's main cast to highlight and flesh out in a manner usually reserved for final cases. Admittedly, the tutorial and DLC cases are pretty mediocre, but being the game's bookends, they don't really interrupt the flow of the game's narrative in any significant way, and so I'm willing to be more forgiving towards them. Spirit of Justice is also the first game in the main series since Trials and Tribulations to feel confident in its direction, both in terms of its themes and its characters. You may not like the direction it chooses to take, but I would much prefer any sort of confident direction to Apollo Justice Ace Attorney's identity crisis, or Dual Destinies' timid testing of the waters. Replaying the Apollo games as a trilogy, I've begun to get the distinct impression that nobody, not even Takumi, really knew what to do with Apollo. 3 games after Apollo's introduction, and finally Spirit of Justice is willing to give the man a proper character arc. I will say though, as much as I love Spirit of Justice, I do wonder where the series will go from here. Apollo has been effectively written out of the story without either of the 2 major plot threads from his debut title having received any form of resolution. I suppose they could bring him back for a single case just to wrap things up, but it would feel like a bit of an awkward move. Then there's the issue of having Phoenix remain as a playable character in the series going forward. Personally, I thought that Phoenix was actually used really well in both Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice. His character arc more or less having been completed already, he acts in these games as an impartial observer who enhances the arcs of other characters not necessarily suited for playability, Athena and Turnabout for Tomorrow and Rafa respectively. This worked in those games, but with there no longer being 3 lawyers in the picture, I can't help but feel it would sharpen the focus if they just cut the number of playable characters all the way down to 1. The obvious solution is to make Athena the main character going forward, and this is what Turnabout Storyteller and the final scene of the game both seem to be pointing towards, but with Yamazaki now out of the picture, I wonder if whoever the next main series writer ends up being would care enough to continue the arc of a barely developed character in favor of just writing something involving the ever-popular Phoenix Wright. I'm really rooting for Athena Sykes' Ace Attorney, as the dynamic between Athena and Simon in Turnabout Storyteller has a completely different energy to anything in the series so far that I think would make a fresh new start, but I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity was my first exposure to the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon series, and I adored it. Imagine my surprise then when I found out that it was hated online, at least within some corners of the fandom. I've read most of the common complaints about the game. Small deck size, small post-game, the inability to complete more than one mission at once, the lack of a hunger mechanic, etc. But what has always confused me about the hate is that it seems sort of disproportionate to the amount that these flaws actually detract from the gameplay experience. For sure, the game is mechanically regressive, I know it sounds bad, bear with me here, from the previous entries, and I will admit to being a tad biased, but having gone back to this game for the first time in 5 years, these missing features have never amounted to more than minor gripes for me. My 2 actual complaints with this game, that being the slow text speed and the absolutely incompetent AI, who will often use ineffective moves when they have super effective moves in their arsenal, and start running in the opposite direction if they're more than 2 tiles away from the rest of the party, have nothing to do with the previous entries. Gates to Infinity, when taken on its own merits, gets a ton right in my book. The story and characters are great. Pretty much all of the major side characters have their own character arc alongside you and your partner, and the story has a good handful of fun twists, though I will concede that I'm not a lover of how the final boss was handled. The dungeon crawling is a ton of fun, and of course the soundtrack is excellent. I'm also a fan of how you can customize your Paradise area with various stat-boosting facilities and minigames to earn items. It's just a little touch of personalization that I appreciate. All in all though, come on guys. The quality of life improvements alone are enough to put this over the original Rescue Team games. You'll have to excuse the odd comparison, but Persona 3 Reload reminds me a lot of Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX in the sense that as a remake, it doesn't change much, but what it does change does wonders for the game's enjoyability. Persona 3 Portable was an absolute drag to play through, and the only reason I forced myself to finish it was to see how it would stack up against Reload, which I knew would be releasing a few months later. The main thing holding Portable back, as I outlined in my review for that game, was Tartarus. If Tartarus' 250 plus floors of randomly generated dungeon didn't already set you off, then the accompanying boss fights that more often than not prefer to act as HP sponges rather than anything that would encourage the player to take advantage of the game's rather basic elemental weakness mechanics definitely did. Normally I would complain about the way Reload addresses these issues, opting to give each party member a nuke attack and changing the layout style every block instead of properly rebalancing the bosses and crafting a more thoughtfully designed dungeon, but if it works, it works. Tartarus and Reload doesn't make me want to tear my hair out, so I can't complain too much. The other nice thing about not absolutely dreading the gameplay segments is that it frees up my headspace to actually appreciate the writing. The main cast of Persona 3 Reload is absolutely stellar, a fact which didn't fully click with me during my playthrough of Portable. Character writing has consistently been the strongest part of the modern Persona trilogy, to the point where I honestly find it hard to declare a favorite cast out of the three. What sets Persona 3's cast apart from 4 and 5's is how fleshed out they all are as individuals. All their personal struggles are well established, not only through the conflicts that the plot throws at them, but also through their clashes with each other, both past and present. I already talked about this in my review of Portable, but I would be remiss not to once again single out Aigis' character arc as one of the strongest, if not the strongest in the series. Her learning to come to terms with the two initially irreconcilable halves of her identity through her time at Makoto is not only a unique take on the robot with feelings character archetype, at least as far as I'm aware, but also serves to make the game's ending all the more devastating. That all being said, a few of my complaints with the original game do still stand. The game's plot is weirdly backloaded, and the twists are still for the most part poorly foreshadowed. Takaya is largely uncompelling as a villain, spending the first half of the game seemingly baffled at the idea that other people might not want power, and just generally not showing any real human emotion besides mild irritation until the very end of the game. It doesn't help that he looks like Jesus, making him impossible to take seriously. Finally, the rest of the main party being as fleshed out as they are, this is a Persona game where the protagonist being silent works the least. There's still a part of me that wishes Aigis was the main protagonist. It's things like these that still make Persona 3 feel like the scrappy black sheep of the modern Persona trilogy, in spite of the fresh coat of paint that Reload gives it. I hope that returning to Persona 3 for this remake has reminded Atlus of what Persona 3 does uniquely well compared to its successors, so that they might borrow more heavily from it for Persona 6. Finishing Reload, what strikes me the most is how many interesting and unique ideas it has in terms of its story. Persona 4 and 5 lean so much into their characters that as a result, I think their stories become a bit boilerplate. Characters are everything when it comes to storytelling, of course, but Persona 3 is a very character-centric story, so it's not like they would have to throw away all the experience they've gained in terms of character writing over the years to follow in Persona 3's footsteps. As I've said, I think Persona 3 in structure alone is just a bit too rough around the edges to put it above the pinnacle of JRPG polish that is Persona 5 Royal, but a game with Persona 5 Royal's polish and Persona 3 Reload's ambition would be one for the history books indeed. I couldn't fit this anywhere else in the review, but I have to say, I find it incredibly funny that the two best characters in the Persona series are the robot and the dog. Oh, these videos keep getting shorter and shorter, huh? Maybe one of these months it'll finally pass the 10-minute mark. Anyway, normally I would do a quick wrap up here, but before I do that, I actually want to give some updates. In addition to this video, there are 2 more videos planned to hit the channel this month. The first one is a character analysis video essay of Shoko Sakurane, which I sort of vaguely teased during my year-end video from last year. And the second is a sort of commemoration video of the 1-year anniversary of my debut album, Feel at Home. Looking back, the album's definitely pretty rough around the edges, and I already think I've gotten a lot better in the year span, but I still like a lot of the tracks on there, so I'm going to be releasing a bunch of like the demos and stuff from that album, because all of the songs on there were based on things I'd recorded years ago. None of it was like wholly new. So I just want to kind of give a behind-the-scenes look on the process. Maybe no one cares about that, but I at the very least wanted to put it up there for posterity. And that'll be hitting whatever the 1-year anniversary date for that is. I think it's April 22nd. But yeah, I've probably had it up for the last minute or so, but here are the yearly ranking lists, and I will see you all next time.